Hello. Today we are going to get serious. None of that frivolity that sometimes I digress into. No, not today. We're going to get very serious because we're talking about the lead of a story. In the last video, we talked about story forms for writing press releases. And gosh, I was just giddy, absolutely giddy about it. Today, I'm getting serious because this is serious stuff. The lead of an article or a press release, or what some people might call a story, is the most important part. And if you don't get it right, then your story or your press release is not going to get read. So we got to get serious about this. We're going to talk about leads. So, as I've intimated, the lead is the beginning or the first paragraph. Sometimes it might be the first two paragraphs of a press release. It is by far the most important part of the story or the release, because if people do not read on after reading your lead or get all the way through the lead of the press release or story, then they'll never know what it is that you are trying to impart to them. So the lead needs to be good. So I've got a few tips for you on lead writing. I've been writing them since I was your age. And gosh, that was a long time ago. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to be silly or giddy. None of that. But it was quite a while ago, and I've been trying to hone my lead writing all of these years because it is so important. And I do spend quite a bit of time thinking about my lead for a press release before I actually start typing. And then I spend quite a bit of time crafting it as I'm typing it, and then I go back a number of times and revise it. And I think that that is probably a good habit to get into. Don't be too thrilled with your very first try at a lead unless it's just a killer lead. So a lead, the first paragraph or the first couple paragraphs of a story or a press release. It should first grab attention. It should be much like the headline in ad copy. It needs, and actually a press release is going to have a headline too, but we'll talk about that later. But it should grab the reader's attention, and not just grab it, but pull them in, pull the reader into the story so that they absolutely cannot lose their attention. You cannot lose their attention. You want to hang on to it. So the lead needs to pull them in and keep them. It also needs to be concise. It should not be too terribly long. We like to say in the news business that a lead shouldn't be more than 30 words. Many really great leads are much, much shorter than that. Now you might read the New York Times or sometimes the Wall Street Journal, and their leads may be a little bit longer than that, and sometimes quite a bit longer than that. But I don't think that that's a good habit to get into, because you know how short attention spans are. You don't want people slogging through a long lead. You also want your lead to either tease people into the story, come on, you just can't resist this, or you want it to summarize the important key point or points of the story. So it can either tease them in and be cute or funny or clever, or it can be pretty straightforward but really hit those key points that are already very strong and worthy of using in the lead. And finally, and there's going to be other lists, so don't think, oh, it was a 5-minute video, yay! But in this key list of what a lead should be, a lead should also have a punch, a twinkle, a cleverness, or invoke emotion. Maybe it's going to play upon emotions in a sort of use of a pathos kind of appeal. So, how do we decide what goes into the lead of a story? What we call that in public relations and marketing especially is, how are we going to frame this story? And that's what we emphasize in our lead, is how we're framing the story. Because sometimes, maybe quite often, public relations or marketing people may decide to frame a story slightly differently than a news person might, or a member of the media or a journalist, whatever you want to call them. That doesn't mean they're putting a spin on it. Please don't use the word spin when it comes to marketing and public relations and promotions. That is a dirty word, because we don't want to spin anything. It may spin right out of control on you if you're not careful. But we do sometimes decide to frame things differently, maybe more positively than a news person or a very hard-nosed journalist might. Because we are always looking for the positive aspects of a situation. So, but the main things that we're looking for when we're determining how to frame our story or what to lead with is what's new, different, or changing. Or I might also say unusual or / unique. I am always looking for that as a writer, whether it was in my journalistic days, my purely journalistic days, or now as a public relations and marketing person. I'm always looking for what makes this product, what makes this new program, what makes this business, what makes this new ownership different, unique, special, what stands out in my mind as I do my interviewing and my information gathering, my research, talking with people, and gathering data and information. What makes this particular thing that I'm going to be writing about special, really special, makes it stand out against all the others or the competition or anything that's similar to that that's been done before? Maybe it's an event. What makes it new, different, changing, or unique? That is a pervasive question that every news or feature editor in the world judges a story by or a press release by. So you can count on the fact that if that's what you're going to focus on, you're going to have something, a story or an article that is viable and newsworthy. The problem with press releases and news releases that come from PR and marketing people is that they have not used those criteria a lot of times, and therefore the editors find those stories not newsworthy. So if you keep new, different, changing, and unique, special in mind, you're going to please those editors more likely than not. I don't want to disappoint you, but about 80% of the releases that are written do not get used because they don't meet those criteria. So you want to be in that 20%, that little 20% that lives by those criteria and has more success getting your information into the media so that you get your client's information out there, or your boss's information or company's information out there. Now, some additional tips for writing good leads that really pull people in and hang on to them so that they make it into the body of your story. In addition to being concise and not wordy. We also want to be specific. So if you can possibly not just say that there were a lot of people at the opening of this new store. Maybe you can say there were 350 people at that opening. Maybe you can say there were 10,000 people at the opening of the new Coca-Cola display, or the new Coca-Cola building, or whatever it is. Be specific rather than general anytime you possibly can. If you can give them numbers, if you can give them a specific time of day instead of afternoon, maybe it's at 3 p.m., be as specific as you possibly can. Now, a lot of people will tell you to focus a lead of a story on who, what, when, where, of course, how and why. They call it the 5 W's and an H. And those are still useful. But those kinds of leads are made for straight news. Let's say someone has died, or there's been an auto accident, or there's been a layoff at the plant. Who, what, when, where, how, and why are going to work okay for a lead for straight news. But for the kind of marketing, PR kind of releases that we're going to be writing, probably for the rest of our lives, if that's what we go into, the general 5 W's are not going to get it. They're not going to attract the editor's attention. But we still need to be specific and be journalistic about it. And I like to tell my PR students and advertising students that you have to think like a journalist. So even though you're not officially in journalism, you still have to think like one, because those are the people that we're trying to attract. I mentioned that before. You want to use strong, active words and verbs, and I've mentioned that before too. You want to say that they dove in, or the potato chips fluttered out of the mechanism that produced them or that slices them. You want to say that it's a driving beat, or it's a incandescent sort of aura around it. You want to be specific, and you want to use juicy words, and you want to use active verbs. Try to stay away from the passive. Try to stay away from the helping verbs like have been, would have, and the ing words. Avoid those participial phrases with playing or thinking. They think, they play, they dance, they trip lightly, they flip and twirl. Use verbs that have meaning and oomph and juice to them. Vim and vigor, as one of my teachers used to say back in school. Wow, I can remember that far back. Oh, sorry. Need to stay serious here. I'll give you my serious look, my thinking look. Could do the thinker. I'm actually in a place where I could do the thinker. Emphasize the magnitude and the importance of this story. Again, what's new, different, changing, unusual, what makes it important? You need to ask yourself that, and that's what you want to lead with, because that will attract people's attention. As I mentioned before, you want to stress the unusual, because that's what news is. It's not something old that's happened sometime in the past. It's new, it's different, it's changing, and it's unusual. So you really want to emphasize that. Sorry, allergy season. Oh, I almost started to sing, but I won't. We're being serious. You want to also localize the lead if you possibly can. Make it local instead of general. If it's going to go to a local market, then you want to make it specific to your local market. What's happening in Johnson City? What's happening in the Tri-Cities? What's happening in Upper East Tennessee? Rather than general to the nation, unless this is going out in a national way. You want to be objective. And that's something that PR people and sometimes marketing people, advertising representatives have a little trouble with, is being objective. You don't want to sound in love with the product or the new business or the new program or the new equipment or whatever it is that you're writing your business press release about. You don't want to sound fluffy and excited and, oh, it was just glorious and beautiful and lovely and wonderful. And it was the most excellent thing that ever happened. That's not going to be acceptable to editors who are looking for news. So you need to put your objective hat on, your journalist's hat on, and keep objective, stay in the third person, and attribute anything that's opinion. So if somebody says that it's fabulous, wonderful, beautiful, extraordinary, and the best thing that's ever happened to Johnson City, great. Quote them directly on it. Keep your pencil out, keep your recorder going, get the direct quote. Because as I mentioned before, direct quotes, human voices are going to make a big difference. You may or may not use direct quotes in your lead, but if it's a really striking quote where a scientist says that this is the most important discovery in cancer research in the past century, and this is a believable source, then by golly, quote them in the lead. That's okay. That's good. You also want to write visually. Write so that we can see it. If you're writing about a new product that is very visual, tell us about it. If it's lumpy and bumpy and yellow and wiggles when it moves and makes funny noises, well, by golly, tell us that. Write visually or using sensory imagery. Tell us how it smells, how it sounds, what it feels like to be touched, what it looks like. That's not using opinion, that's using your senses, and that's different. And people respond to that, sometimes emotionally. Also, you want to avoid, as I said, opinion, and especially the kind that might be saying, calling things a tragedy or an ordeal, or unless you're quoting someone, be careful about using labels and labeling situations or products or whatever it is. You want to avoid misleading readers. We want leads to be clear. We want them to be honest, truthful, and you must be able to back them up with reality. You may be tempted to fluff things up a little bit because you think that's what PR and advertising people are supposed to do, but stick to the truth. Stick to what you can see, hear. You can record other people as having said, and that you have data on. And use the positive. Emphasize the positive. There's a song for that, but I'm being serious today, so I can't sing it for you. But it's called Accentuate the Positive and Eliminate the Negative. Don't go at a story from the negative side about what didn't happen or what couldn't happen, but look at it instead from the other side of that coin. Is the glass half full or half empty? Let's make it half full and talk about what can be done because of this new product, or what will be done as a result of this new product. Not what couldn't be done in the past, but what can be done. In business stories, you want to really focus on the benefits, if you possibly can, and if there are benefits. That's very important to selling. a product, right? Because we've talked about that in other kinds of ad copy. It's also important in your stories, in your press releases. So who's going to benefit, and can we interview them? And what are the benefits? Let's be sure that we're going to list those. Maybe not in the lead, but maybe the benefits are the most important thing. Maybe that's what makes this product or new business unique. So what are the benefits? As I mentioned before, include the numbers. How much pay raise are they going to get? How much does this product cost in comparison with others? How many people are going to benefit? If you can use numbers in a business story, numbers read well, and people get excited about numbers. Again, when you can be specific. And then, as I mentioned in the last video, humanize the stories. Bring in the human aspect of things. If you can bring in the humans who benefit from it, that's great. That will move the reader. And again, evoking emotion is one of the things that we want to try to do with a lead, if there is an opportunity to do that. Avoid jargon. It's very dangerous in business stories especially. So we want to translate jargon, which is business speak. We don't want to use it and confuse our readers. And then one of the books that I've used for years and years for teaching writing says, in a good lead sometimes breaks the rules. Maybe you break a couple rules of proper journalistic writing to really get the message across, because that's one of the things that obviously you're going to have to decide, just as you decide in a creative brief or a design brief what your key messages are. You're going to have to decide what the key messages are for your story as well. And then you got to decide what the key message is for your lead. So be sure and jot down what you think the key messages of your story, of this new product, of this new business, of this event. What are those key messages that you need to get across? And you start doing that with the most important of those in your lead. And as I mentioned, rewrite. Once you've written it, try again. Hone it, get just the right words, peel out and sift through and get out any extra words that you do not need. We don't want them in there. A few kind of don'ts, and I try not to do too many of those, but you want to avoid starting a lead, if you possibly can, with a, an, or the, or other empty words. Start with words that are active and have meaning to them. Try, if you can, to avoid starting with empty words. You certainly never want to start with attribution or attributing to your official source. In fact, you don't ever want to start a sentence with attribution. You can always put that at the end. And we'll talk more about that later. You want to avoid date leads or date openers where you say, on December 2015, blah, blah, blah will happen. Fairly seldom, pretty much never, is the date the most important information. So keep that for somewhere else, and maybe not even in your lead, but certainly not the first words of your lead. I'm sorry, but that's a lazy way to start a story. So keep the date for a little bit farther into the story somewhere. Let's see what else. Differing kinds of leads. You're not going to vary a whole lot probably in press release writing as far as the kind of lead that you write, but you don't want every lead that you write to be the same as the last. That's dull for you, and it's dull for the people, especially the editors who read your work. So There are summary leads, as we talked about, that summarize the main points that you want to get across. There's a punch kind of lead that has a special twist in it that kind of teases people into the story, or just has an oomph to it. There's a picture lead where you paint a picture, as I mentioned before, using imagery, things that you see, smell, hear, or touch. There are question leads, which I'm not crazy about. Very seldom do I encourage someone to write a question lead. One, because they're terribly easy to write, and they're a sign of kind of lazy writing, lazy thinking, going the simple route. But also because people may respond to that question with a no. So you want to be very careful what kind of question leads you craft if you're going to use one, because you don't want them to answer no and then not read on. And I'll give you an example of that here in a minute. Quotation lead, as I mentioned before, where you use a direct quote, but that direct quote better be juicy, it better be good, it better be important. And they should have said something quite important if you're going to use that. And then a freak kind of lead, where maybe you make a little poem or something like that. It's not likely that you're going to use a freak lead on a press release. You might do that if you were a reporter, a feature writer, but it's not terribly likely that you're going to do that as a press release writer. But here's a lead that paints a picture. For most folks, sleeping in tents or palmetto-thatched chickees, eating gator meat fried over smoky fires and smearing on the juice of a dog fennel plant to ward off biting bugs would not be the ideal vacation. But it suits a small group of sturdy souls, including American Indians, wilderness survival experts, rattlesnake trappers, and a handful of rambunctious preteen boys who will end a 10-day campout today in the muggy backwoods of South Georgia. So it kind of painted us a picture of what it's like to be camping with the biting bugs in the palmetto-thatched chickees of the Georgia swamps. I like that. I like getting a picture of things. Now, you don't want to write a picture lead every time. That's kind of boring too. Here's another picture. Almost 5 years after Hurricane Hugo, the Charleston County Courthouse on this city's most famous intersection sits dark, desolate, and deserted. Its windows still boarded and taped, as if anticipating another killer storm, painting a picture of an abandoned building, or many abandoned buildings in a city that's been ravaged by a hurricane. That gets my attention, and that is the goal, right? We want to get people's attention. Here's one of my favorites, and it's sort of a freak lead. It's definitely a punch kind of lead, and I love it. Now, I'm not sure you can use this in your kind of writing for press releases, but there might come a time. The dateline is Philadelphia. Hostile my butt. In a new survey, the Condé Nast Traveler finds Philadelphia the friendliest city in the country, not the snake pit of hostility portrayed in a North Carolina study just 3 months back. Residents in the city of brotherly love are kind enough to hold parking spots, give directions, and take pictures for tourists. How do you like that? Hostile my butt. Oh, to be the person that got to write that lead. I can't imagine. Oh, sorry. I've got to be very serious about this. And really, I am very serious. That's one of my all-time favorite leads. I've always wanted to put my butt in a lead. Now it's too big to do that. Oh, sorry. Gotta be serious. Okay, I've rambled on quite a bit about writing leads. And it is very serious business because, as I said, it's what guides, steers, leads, drags, urges, cajoles the readers, I'm using active verbs, did you notice, into the story. And then they'll get to read the rest of the story. So be sure that you take time with your leads. You need to think about the messages that you want to get across in the story. You want to think about how you're going to frame this press release, this event, this new product, this report that may have come out about the city that you're promoting. And then after you've decided what your key messages are and how you want to frame it, then try some differing kinds of leads, keeping them concise, keeping them specific, keeping them positive rather than negative, using active words, not the empty words, and emphasizing what's unique. Just think to yourself, what makes it unique? You do that about your friends. You do that about your own experiences. What made that special to me? Why was that so meaningful to me? You need to just focus that kind of same attention and quizzical thinking, curiosity on your products. It's if it's going to be your life's work, doing this kind of work, then this is serious business. So let's think seriously about leads, and I look forward to reading some of your leads. They don't all have to be serious, but if you take it seriously, if you enjoy it, and if you really savor this process, and the lead being the beginning of the release writing process, then it's going to show in your writing. So let's get serious.